Hello. My name is Travis, and my pronouns are he and him. It's really good to be here with you today, and to be with you for this year in the role of student chaplain. I've been really impressed as I've started to learn about the systems and programs in place here, of the ways that you all take care of each other and the world. I'm really touched by just how much you all do to embody your UU values. It inspires me. So, thank you. I was talking with Reverend Rodney a few weeks ago about how faith and spirituality came into my life, about what brought me here. He asked me about my childhood, if there was a religious context that supported me in my early life. I told him how I had grown up in a non-religious context, one without spiritual faith. The pervading sentiment of that context was that faith was irrational and dangerous. My mother actually was and is someone who has a relationship with what she calls God. But she was always quiet about it, at least with me until I was older. I think maybe my father's greater confidence about his perspectives, which were really open, but especially rooted in observational logic, and the societal messaging she had picked up about religion and spirituality, made her want to hide it. My father's father had been hurt by the Catholic Church, so the threat and danger of religion, the way that it can be exploitative and harmful, was front of mind for him. In my family, there was a sort of implied and practiced understanding that the secular, scientific way was the true way. There was a feeling that faith and spirituality, things that logic couldn't prove, were not worth considering. If there was a morality that we would follow, it would be discovered inside of the relationship of societal agreements, reasoned philosophy, and our own personal understandings of things, especially through experience. I think this perspective taught me a lot, especially to think clearly, to make sure I had evidence for my beliefs, and to always tap into my own evolving philosophy to make decisions and to grow as a person. Unfortunately, this perspective also held me back from some nourishing ways of thinking and believing, ways that now are my greatest partners in the dance of life. I told Reverend Rodney this, and he responded by saying something akin to, "Oh, so you didn't have to go through the process and cycles of undoing shame to get here." I believe he was speaking of those whose childhood religion instilled some shames in them, and who had to find the courage and boldness to leave that institution and that psycho-emotional orientation, decondition themselves, grapple with doubt and personal discovery, and then discover and feel into a calling to come back to spiritual and religious community in a setting that better reflected their organic values. Maybe some of you can connect to that journey. I have deep admiration for those who traveled that arduous path, because facing shame is a brave spiritual task. In relation to that, dispelling shame will be a topic at the Breath and Spirit Retreat coming up this Saturday. I think Reverend Rodney was feeling some gladness that I didn't have to deal with that cycle of shame, because he understood how painful that can be, how it can linger and hold back joy. I said, yeah, that's true, and also, I think there was a different kind of shame that I had to contend with in my life, from my childhood context. And that held me back from some ways of believing and perceiving that have been really good for me. Something about growing up with the idea that things needed to be able to fit into a logic and be externally verifiable to merit acceptance instilled a sort of shame there for me around spiritual perspectives, around any trusting without material evidence. I held this story that if I submitted to the irrationalities of faith, such as, or spirituality or religion, that I would be trading my reasoned sensibilities for a dreamy, cushy comfort object, like an infant clutching a stuffed animal. And I think I was afraid because I felt like I would be vulnerable. That fear and shame held me back from perspectives and ways of trusting that could, and now do, really bring peace and acceptance to my life. I am sad that I was unable to access spirituality and faith, because now they bring me space for a greater depth of love. Jennifer Hernandez, a teacher and therapist to adults living with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and my partner, posed the following question for personal reflection. How do you hold that you are living in an existence that has so much suffering? Faithlessness and disregard for the mysterious really made it hard for me not to be depressed and despairing about the realities of suffering in the world. It froze me up and kept me from imagining a way to be active in countering them, because I couldn't place all that hardship into any context, anything that held it with unknowing. I didn't have a context that there could be more at play than I knew about. I didn't have a context that opened room for me to hope and find trust. Shame as a barrier to spiritual faith was, for me, a barrier to full engagement in my life. Before I overcame my shame and welcomed spiritual faith, I understood the story of religion as a story of exploitation. As humans using seductive and often dishonest stories to manipulate great numbers of people into behaviors that sometimes benefited many, but often empowered only a few. To be tricked by that story in any way was terribly shameful, especially because I knew better. That was what I held. Believing in something that wasn't provable felt too dangerous. I was really lucky to have a breakdown of that shame when my heart and mind suddenly opened to spirituality and faith in my mid-20s. I am grateful because that spiritual faith guided me to Zen Buddhist monastic practice. I am grateful because that spiritual faith guided me to seminary and to justice work. I am grateful because that spiritual faith has worked to lead me here to spiritual care. More than anything, I am grateful because that spiritual faith has helped me to live into my spiritual values and to live in the peace of believing that though I cannot understand life, though its loving presence is beyond mysterious to me, I can learn from and be guided by life. That being said, carefulness in faith is essential. There are some really important protections that come from skepticism and doubt. And if we look back into the past at the harms of religions, and there are so many, it is hard to imagine a healthy regard for religion, a healthy faith that doesn't include skepticism. There are many dangers on the faith path, especially in religious settings. This is a subject that could have its own series of sermons or classes. Because if we're going to practice religious life together, we should study the dangers and practice protecting ourselves and each other from them. But why do we have to be especially careful with spiritual religious wounding? Don't all institutions have their dangers? Yes. But when we freshly open up that part of ourselves that appreciates and trusts the mystery and infiniteness of the world, we are often deeply vulnerable. Maybe we shut that openness down at a certain point in our life. Perhaps certain narratives in childhood and caregiver modeling invited us to let that go. Then all of a sudden, when we open it up again, it can be life-changing to set aside our doubts and trust the world's wonder and awe, the magic and mystery of existence. And it may also be destabilizing because we are so open. Our foundational beliefs are no longer absolute. When harm or abuse is piled on top of that, especially from a religious leader or organization, it can be overwhelmingly disappointing. It can force us to lock our doors to discovery and wonder and anchor us to disdain for hope and optimism. Opening our hearts and minds to religion, spirituality, and faith can be really dangerous. And spiritual wounding is so painful exactly because spiritual faith may be so powerfully enriching to life. I believe some of the most powerful goods, perhaps much of what makes life most fulfilling and meaningful, may come from radical trust or faith in things we can't prove materially. Spiritual faith can open us more deeply to these parts of life. That could also be its own sermon series, its own class, its own life of conversations and sharing. My favorite good that comes from spiritual faith and religious practice is greater access to and capacity to share kindness, care, and love. The practice and perspectives of spirituality and faith may enable us to move through life with patience, to feel more connected to ourselves, each other, and peace, and to be more empowered to care for ourselves and others. I believe there is too much good in spiritual faith to let fear and shame make us avoid it altogether. If there are benefits and dangers to spirituality, religion, and faith, how do we navigate the dangers and harms so that we can access the benefits more safely? I don't have any solid answers to this, because even when we are most careful, we can still be harmed greatly. Like life, the situation is complex and it is always changing. Unfortunately, sometimes our answers to this question will be in how we respond communally to harms already committed. I do have some feelings about what has seemed to help me navigate around and sometimes out of or through certain dangers while practicing spiritual faith. I hope these feelings and the thoughts they inspire in me can encourage thoughts, feelings, and conversation in you. To me, these feel like important pathways to sustainable spiritual faith. One of the most important guiding practices for my spiritual and religious development has been to anchor in my own authentic, organic, internal wisdoms. I believe this is best achieved in balance with a heart-centered connection to all. By anchoring in my internal wisdoms, heart guidance, and deepest values, I can develop a more sustainable spiritual practice. Before I look to take too much, too strongly from others, I can ground by examining what I truly want and what I truly believe in. I can explore how those parts of myself are stable and how they change. In that process, I may discover and then root into my foundational inner wisdoms and values. I think when I do that, when I have a strong base of organic heart wisdom. Then I can run the things that I take from others up against that filter and ask myself, does this feel like it fits with what is most true to me? I can sustain and develop my faith and spiritual lens by empowering my own direct connection to mystical wisdom, the infinite, and the web of interdependence. I think this is a place where personal techniques for patient contemplation, such as meditation, can be such important supports. Another really important practice for me is to respect and trust plurality. As I feel more and more rooted in my own wisdoms, I gain the capacity to open to developing my perspectives by exploring the wisdoms of others. I don't have to be stuck with just one source of external wisdom and practice. In fact, I think we should all be very careful not to find only one person or group who seems really good at providing our spiritual wisdom, fix down onto them as the one who has all the answers, and close our minds to the ever-present stream of wisdom coming at us from infinite directions. I motivate this type of spiritual exploration in myself by practicing and holding faith in diversity. This compels me to look beyond any one narrative, to believe there's always more to learn, and that I can always open further. It can be uncomfortable to feel this way, because it's nice to think, oh, here's a simple answer, and now I'm done. It's convenient to rest in one truth. This is especially real for me if I feel stuck in suffering. Then a single doorway out is my lifeline. Sometimes a single answer is really important. But when I have the spaciousness and safe rooting to be patient and open, I think it's really important not to latch down onto one way too hard. I don't want to trap myself. And the desire to develop and diversify perspectives is enlivening for me. It keeps my spiritual journey fresh and authentic. The final important support on my spiritual pathway is to remember that all the practices, words, and truths I encounter are touched by humans. Everything flows through the narrow tunnel, Everything flows through the narrow tunnel of becoming. And when it is shared, human to human, it is filtered and changed. In that way, I remember that spiritual wisdoms and truths are flawed, imperfect, biased, and able to harm. When there is a particular truth that feels most ideal to me, remembering the human or humans who are a part of delivering that truth helps me remember that I am receiving something that is but part of the truth, never whole. I don't think humans can encapsulate the whole truth. It's part of our wonderfulness and terribleness that we are only ever partially correct. To me, it's that imperfection that makes us team workers, makes us components of the harmony of togetherness. It makes us depend on each other, care for each other, love each other, and grow towards our co-dreamed horizon together. I deeply appreciate Unitarian Universalism because these guiding values seem to be at the heart of the religion. But even with these guiding orientations, injury can still happen, and it does. I think the most important thing is that after injury happens, we all come together to tend to each other. I have this feeling that this tending to each other's wounds is what community is really all about. There's a lot missing here. Maybe there are some good things to what I'm bringing up, but if there are definitely some things wrong with it too. I'm sorry for my ignorance on this topic. But it's an important topic for me because it gives me hope in spiritual faith. I have hope that there are ways to navigate spiritual faith that can be more safe while acknowledging that everything's got risks. With this hope, it feels appropriate to lean into spiritual faith and to receive its gifts. But what exactly is this spiritual faith I keep referring to? To me, it is a commitment to being in caring relationship with life and existence. It includes being disappointed and angry and hurt. It includes being lifted up and awed in ways I never thought possible. It includes times that are just normal and routine. It includes times of great doubt. And it includes times when I feel close to despair. And I decide to summon trust, perhaps a trust in life and existence to be ultimately a force for love. This keeps hope and the potential to act from love alive in me. It helps me arrive with an orientation of practice, looking to grow and to develop. And it gives my life purpose. Spiritual faith gives me a true friend who is there in everything, because everything is life. It feels like finding my home in life because it gives me a bond present in everything and everyone. My prayer is that we all work to promote conditions in this world that reflect such a bond, such a home in life for all. I think in a mysterious way, this is already the case. And in practical reality, we all have a lot of work to do. I'm excited to work with you. Thank you.